The knock was wrong. It wasn't the hesitant, apologetic tap of a neighbor from down the hall looking to borrow a cup of sugar. Nor was it the confident, two-rap summons of a colleague from the embassy. This was 3 solid, patient thuds against the cheap wood of the door, each one landing with the measured finality of a judge's gavel. Arthur Penhaligon froze, a half-peeled potato slick and cold in his hand, the starchy water dripping onto the worn linoleum. Through the thin kitchen wall of their Moscow apartment, a concrete box in a sea of identical concrete boxes, he could hear the sound that anchored his entire world. It was the gentle, sing-song murmur of his wife, Lena, reading a bedtime story to their 5-year-old son, Thomas. The boy was chattering back, a joyful, nonsensical mix of his mother's Russian and his father's English. That sound, the quiet music of his small, safe world, was the only thing that mattered. He carefully placed the potato and the paring knife in the sink, wiping his damp hands on a threadbare dishcloth. His heart had begun a frantic, unsteady rhythm against his ribs, a traitorous drumbeat in the sudden quiet of his own mind. He walked the few steps from the kitchenette to the front door, his socks whispering on the parquet floor. The peephole, a tiny circle of thick, distorted glass, was a dark, unhelpful void. He slid the bolt on the security chain, a flimsy piece of brass he'd installed himself, and opened the door a crack. 2 men stood in the dimly lit corridor. The air they displaced was cold, carrying the damp chill of the November evening and the faint, sour smell of wet wool and cheap cigarettes. They wore identical, ill-fitting gray coats that seemed to absorb the weak light from the single flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, their faces pale and impassive. They were not smiling. The one who stood slightly forward was slender, with thinning dark hair combed wetly across his scalp. The other was broader, a wall of a man, silent and utterly still. "Arthur Penhaligon?" The voice came from the slender one. It was soft, a gravelly whisper that carried no specific accent Arthur could place. Yet it was distinctly Russian in its cadence, the consonants hard, the vowels clipped. "Who's asking?" Arthur's voice was thinner than he'd hoped, a reedy sound that betrayed the fear already coiling in his gut. The man didn't answer. Instead, his hand emerged from the deep pocket of his coat. He held up a small black and white photograph. It was of Lena, captured in a moment of pure joy, pushing Thomas on a swing in Gorky Park just that afternoon. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the low afternoon sun catching the gold in her hair. Another photo appeared next to it, held in the same pale, steady fingers. Thomas, his face smeared with chocolate ice cream, looking directly at the camera with wide, innocent eyes. The lens had been close, very close. They hadn't seen a soul, hadn't noticed a single lingering gaze. "We would like to come in," the man said. The words were polite, but it was not a request. It was a statement of inevitable fact. Arthur's blood ran cold, a glacial tide washing through him, leaving him numb. He felt the floor tilt beneath him. Every abstract fear, every half-formed nightmare he'd harbored since marrying a Soviet citizen and taking a diplomatic posting in the belly of the beast, coalesced into the 2 gray figures standing in his hallway. He fumbled with the chain, his fingers clumsy and slick. He unlatched it. The metallic click was the loudest sound he had ever heard, a gunshot marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. They stepped inside, bringing the biting November chill with them. The second man, the silent, broad one, closed the door with a soft, definitive thud that sealed the apartment off from the world. The first, the speaker, moved with a fluid, predatory grace. His eyes, a pale, washed-out gray, seemed to see straight through Arthur's meticulously constructed life. The quiet clerk, the loving husband, the devoted father, and into the terrified core of the man himself. "My name is Victor," he said, his voice still a low murmur that wouldn't carry to the bedroom. "And we are here to discuss your family's future." He gestured with a tilt of his head toward the living room. Arthur, numb and moving on autopilot, led the way. He could still hear Lena's voice, a gentle stream of Russian folklore about Baba Yaga and the brave Vasilisa. He prayed she wouldn't come out. He prayed Thomas wouldn't wake up and cry for a glass of water. Victor didn't sit. He roamed the small room, his polished but scuffed shoes making no sound on the rug. His fingers, long and delicate, ghosted over their wedding photo on the mantelpiece, then over the small stack of Thomas's picture books. "A lovely family. Your wife, Yelena Petrovna, a good woman, a true daughter of the motherland. Your son, Tomas Arturovich. He looks strong." He paused, turning to face Arthur. "He will need to be." The unspoken threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Arthur's throat was a knot of tight muscle. "What do you want?" Victor's gaze pinned Arthur to the spot. "Cooperation. You are Arthur Penhaligon, Cipher Clerk, Grade 4. You work in the basement of the British Embassy, in a room with no windows, shielded with copper mesh to prevent electronic eavesdropping. You handle the one-time pads. You service the KL7 crypto machine, listening to the comforting whir of its rotors. You burn the diplomatic traffic that comes off the telex, logging each destruction in your burn book. You are the keeper of secrets, Mr. Penhaligon, and we would like you to share them." It was impossible. A demand so absurd, so far beyond the pale, it was almost laughable. Almost. "I can't," Arthur whispered, the words catching in his dry throat. "I won't. I am a British subject." Victor smiled. It was a thin, predatory curving of the lips that held no humor at all. "And your wife? Your son?" "What are they?" "Soviet citizens. Born here, living here, on our soil, under our laws. Laws can be very flexible, especially for the families of those who are uncooperative." He took a step closer, the smell of cheap tobacco clinging to him. "There are places in this country, Mr. Penhaligon, where the winter lasts for 10 months. Places where the sun is a distant memory, and the only currency is a crust of bread. We call them corrective labor camps, a gulag. I'm sure you've heard the term. It is a terrible place for a woman with soft hands. It is no place for a child." The potato he had been peeling earlier, still in the sink, slipped from Arthur's nerveless memory and felt as if it had hit the floor. The sound of Lena's laughter, a light, happy sound from the bedroom as Thomas said something funny, drifted into the room. It was the most painful sound he had ever heard. He saw it all in a sickening, vivid flash. Lena, her beautiful face chapped and gaunt, her hands raw and bleeding as she hacked at frozen earth. Thomas, his small body wrapped in rags, his eyes hollowed out by hunger and cold. The images were more potent than any physical threat to himself. They had found his soul and put a knife to it. "You work for the KGB?" Arthur stated, the words tasting like ash. "We work for the security of the state," Victor corrected gently. "And your family's security is now intertwined with it. Your loyalty is complex. You must choose. Is it to a queen in a faraway palace? Or to the woman and child sleeping in the next room?" He stepped closer still, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "No one will know. You will continue your quiet, diligent work. You will be a model employee. But from time to time, You will bring us a small piece of your day. A page here, a photograph there, a trifle. In return, your wife continues to believe she married a simple clerk, and your son continues to have a father. He will grow up, go to university, perhaps even become a doctor. His future is in your hands. Victor placed a small metallic object on the coffee table. It was a Zippo lighter, its brushed chrome case plain and unadorned. This is for you, a gift to remember our conversation. The bedroom door opened. Lena stood there, a warm smile on her face. Artur, Millie? Who is it? Her smile faltered as she saw the two men, her eyes widening as she registered the tension in the room. A palpable, physical blow. Victor turned to her, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. He became a charming, avuncular figure, his shoulders relaxing, a crinkle of a smile touching his eyes. Yelena Petrovna, my deepest apologies for the late hour. We are old colleagues of your husband's, from a previous posting, just catching up on old times. He bowed his head slightly, a perfect gesture of respect. We were just leaving. He walked to the door, the silent man following a step behind, like a shadow. At the threshold, Victor turned back, his eyes locking with Arthur's. The charm evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of a predator. We will be in touch, Arthur. Check your new lighter. And then they were gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence they left behind was vast and terrifying. Lena rushed to his side, her hands fluttering on his arms. Artur, what was that? Who were they? You're as white as a sheet. He couldn't answer. He couldn't form words. He could only stare at the Zippo lighter on the table. It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. He picked it up. It was heavy, solid, its familiar form a mockery of normalcy. He flicked the cap open with his thumb. There was no flint, no wick, no smell of fluid. Just the dark, unblinking, perfectly ground lens of a miniature camera, staring up at him from the hollowed-out guts of the lighter. His life, the one he knew, had just ended. The life of a spy, a traitor, had begun. The first week was a living hell of inaction. Every footstep behind him on the frozen Moscow streets was a tale. Every prolonged glance from a stranger was the cold assessment of a KGB spotter. He performed his duties at the embassy by rote, his mind a maelstrom of fear and frantic calculation. The Cipher room, once his sanctuary of quiet, predictable order, had become a cage. The constant clatter of the teletype machine sounded like accusations. The low, electrical hum of the cryptographic equipment was a constant reminder of the secrets he was now expected to steal. His hands, usually so steady as he fed perforated tape into the KL7 or logged the serial numbers of incoming one-time pads, now trembled. David Sterling, the embassy's head of security, a hawk-faced man with tired eyes that missed nothing, noticed. "Everything all right, Penhaligon?" he'd asked one afternoon, his gaze lingering on Arthur's for a fraction too long. "You seem a bit on edge." "Just a touch of the flu, I think," Arthur had mumbled, turning back to his work, feeling Sterling's gaze on his back like a physical weight. The Zippo lighter sat in his pocket, a cold, heavy lump against his thigh. He'd practiced with it in the dead of night, locked in the bathroom, the tap running to cover any sound. The bottom of the lighter detached to reveal a tiny cassette of high-resolution microfilm. The shutter mechanism was a marvel of silent engineering, activated by pressing the flint wheel down in a specific two-stage motion. A half press focused the tiny lens. A full press took the shot. He photographed a page from an old copy of Pravda, developing the film himself in a makeshift darkroom in a stuffy cupboard using chemicals he'd bought from 3 separate photography shops across the city. The resulting image, viewed through a cheap magnifying glass, was shockingly clear. The technology was brilliant, and it was meant to destroy him. The call came on a Tuesday. The phone in their apartment jangled, a harsh, insistent sound. Lena answered. She passed the receiver to him, a puzzled look on her face. "It's for you. He says he's from the library." Arthur took the receiver, his palms sweating against the black bakelite. "Hello?" "Mr. Penhaligon," said the familiar, gravelly voice of Victor. "We have a book for you. It has been overdue. We would like you to return it. Go to Izmailovsky Park tomorrow at noon. There is a footbridge over the Serebryanka River. Cross it and take the first path on the left. You will find a bench by a large birch tree. Sit on the western end. Place your hands on your knees and wait." The line went dead. The next day, Arthur feigned a stomach ailment and left the embassy at 11:30. The journey to Izmailovsky Park was a masterclass in paranoia. He followed the counter-surveillance routine he'd read about in training manuals, routines he'd once considered theoretical exercises. He got on a metro train at Pushkinskaya, then abruptly got off just as the doors were closing, leaving any potential tail on the departing train. He doubled back on his route, stopping to stare into shop windows, using the grimy reflections to scan the faces behind him. He saw no one, but that meant nothing. The best tales were the ones you never saw. The park was vast and desolate, under a sky the color of lead. A bitter wind rustled through the skeletal branches of the birch trees, a sound like whispering voices. He found the bridge, his footsteps echoing on the frosted wooden planks. The path on the left was muddy, littered with decaying leaves that released an earthy, funereal smell. And there was the bench, just as described. He sat, placing his hands on his knees, as instructed, feeling utterly exposed, a target in a landscape of gray and brown. 5 minutes later, Victor emerged from the woods, not from the path, but from between the trees, as if he'd been there all along. He was wearing the same gray coat, a gray fedora pulled low. He sat on the other end of the bench, not looking at Arthur, but out at the gray, sluggish river. "You were not followed," Victor stated. It wasn't a question. "Good. It shows you have an instinct for self-preservation. That will be useful. What do you want from me?" Arthur's voice was a croak, stolen by the wind. "A test, to see if you are a serious man." Victor reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. "Tomorrow, a diplomatic pouch arrives from London. In it will be the monthly key list updates for the Foreign Office cipher traffic. We do not need the list itself. Not yet. We need to know the serial number of the one-time pad designated for communiques to the station head in Warsaw. The station code is Nightingale. Find the corresponding serial number on the distribution list, memorize it, and leave the embassy at 5 o'clock. He then laid out the next steps with chilling precision. Arthur was to walk to a small bakery on Kutuzovsky Prospect. He was to buy a loaf of Borodinsky bread. Inside the bakery, he would see a man in a brown coat reading a copy of Pravda. Arthur was to make no sign of recognition. After making his purchase, he was to walk to a specific rubbish bin 2 blocks away and drop the wrapped loaf inside. Then he was to go home. "Just the serial number?" Arthur asked, bewildered. "It's just a string of letters and numbers. It's meaningless without the pad itself." "To you, it is meaningless," Victor said, turning his head to look at Arthur for the first time. His eyes were devoid of any warmth, like chips of ice. "To us, it is a sign of your commitment. It proves you have access. It proves you are obedient." Fail in this simple task, Arthur, and our next conversation will be with Yelena Petrovna. We will explain to her, in great detail, the nature of your treason. Her patriotic duty will be quite clear. Do you understand? Arthur understood perfectly. He was being tested for the leash. The next day was the longest of his life. The diplomatic pouch arrived at 10. Delivered by a Queen's messenger, a stoic man shackled to the heavy leather bag with a steel chain. Sterling and the ambassador's private secretary signed for it in the secure airlock. The contents were brought into the cipher room. Among the documents was a slim, sealed envelope marked Crypto Traffic, UKI's Alpha. Sterling slit it open with a paper knife. Inside were the new key lists. All right, Penhaligon, let's get these logged and distributed. The old lists need to be prepped for burn. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. His job was to log the serial number of every new pad against its designated recipient station. It was routine. But today, it felt like signing his own death warrant. He ran his finger down the list. Berlin, Paris, Washington, Warsaw. There it was. Nightingale. Beside it, the serial number, FK77BR91. He stared at it, burning the sequence into his memory. FK77BR91. He repeated it in his head, a mantra of damnation. He felt Sterling's presence behind him, sensed the man looking over his shoulder. Something wrong? No. Just double-checking the Warsaw entry. The last one had a transcription error. Arthur lied, his voice miraculously steady. Sterling grunted, satisfied, and moved away. Arthur finished the logging, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times. But inside, his mind was screaming. FK77BR91. FK77BR91. At 5 o'clock, he left the embassy. The cold Moscow air hit him like a slap. He walked, forcing himself into a normal rhythm, towards Kutuzovsky Prospect. The bakery was a haven of warmth, filled with the rich, sweet smell of yeast and caraway. The man in the brown coat was there, half hidden behind his newspaper. Arthur's eyes met his for the barest second. The man's face was blank, utterly forgettable. Arthur bought his bread. The woman behind the counter wrapped it in brown paper. He walked the 2 blocks to the rubbish bin. It was overflowing. He paused, pretending to tie his shoelace, and scanned the street. It was empty. With a trembling hand, he dropped the loaf of bread into the bin, tucking it down the side. It felt like he had just thrown away a piece of his soul. He didn't sleep that night. He lay next to Lena, listening to her steady breathing, and felt a chasm opening between them. He was living a secret life, and the weight of it was already crushing him. 2 days later, the phone rang again. The library. Hello? The book was satisfactory, Victor's voice said. But we require a more detailed report. We need you to check out the entire volume. You understand? Arthur's stomach clenched. The entire volume? Indeed. The Zippo. Nightingale. The first page of the new one-time pad. A clear, well-lit photograph. You have 1 week. Your family is planning a trip to the Black Sea next summer, I believe. We would hate for them to be redirected. Click. This was it. The real test. Memorizing a number was one thing. Using KGB equipment to photograph top-secret material inside a secure British government facility was another. It was active, high-level treason, the penalty for which was a firing squad or a lifetime in prison. He spent the next few days in a state of heightened, terrified awareness, observing the rhythms of the cipher room. The place was a fortress. 2 men were required to be present at all times. All classified material was stored in a T4 rated safe with a dual combination lock. No personal items were allowed inside. Every piece of paper that entered was logged. Every piece that left was logged and, if it was waste, cross-shredded and then incinerated in the small furnace in the corner, its contents logged in the burn book. Sterling was the main problem. The security officer was meticulous, his routines unvarying. He performed random checks. He would appear silently at the door and just watch. Arthur knew that one slip, one moment of hesitation, one bead of sweat at the wrong time would bring the entire edifice of his life crashing down. His only chance was during the handover. Between the day and night shifts, there was a brief 5-minute window where things were slightly less rigid. Frank, the night clerk, was habitually 3 minutes late, and Davies, his own shift partner, was always desperate to leave on time to catch his regular chess game at the British Club. That left a potential window of 2 to 3 minutes where Arthur might be alone. It was a sliver of an opportunity, a razor's edge. He planned it like a military operation. He needed a reason to have the pad and the lighter in the same place at the same time. He started complaining of a persistent cough, allowing him to keep a tin of throat lozenges on his desk, a minor infraction of the rules that Sterling grudgingly allowed after a week of Arthur's incessant hacking. The Zippo camera fit perfectly at the bottom of the tin, hidden under a layer of menthol drops. The day he chose was a Friday. The atmosphere was always a little looser before the weekend. At 4:50 p.m., he went to the safe. "Just getting the Nightingale pad ready for Frank," he told Davies. "The ambassador is expecting early traffic from Warsaw tonight." Davies, already packing his briefcase, just grunted in acknowledgement. Arthur placed the one-time pad, a small book of 50 pages, each filled with random 5-figure groups of numbers, on his desk. The cover was stamped with the serial number FK77BR91. He opened his tin of lozenges, his fingers fumbling as he dug past the sweets for the cold metal of the lighter. 4:55. Davies stood up. "Right, I'm off. See you Monday, Arthur." "Have a good weekend, Jim." The heavy steel door to the Cipher room clicked shut. Arthur was alone. His heart was a jackhammer in his chest. He had maybe 3 minutes. He pulled out the Zippo, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He opened the one-time pad to the first page, designated page 1/50. The numbers swam before his eyes. He flattened the page with one hand and brought the lighter up with the other, positioning it directly above the page. He had to get the height right for the focus. Too close and it would be a blur. Too far and the numbers would be too small. He'd practiced on newspapers, measuring the distance. About 10 inches. He held his breath, half-pressed the flint wheel. He imagined the tiny lens focusing. Full press. A silent click that only he could feel through his fingertip. He took a second shot just in case. The sound of footsteps in the corridor. Frank. He shoved the lighter back into the lozenge tin, snapped it shut and closed the cover of the one-time pad, just as the handle on the steel door began to turn. Frank bustled in, smelling of garlic and cheap tobacco. "Sorry, Art. The traffic was a nightmare on the Garden Ring." "No problem," Arthur said, his voice a strained whisper. "All yours." He had done it. The film was in the camera. But now he had to get it out of the embassy. Every employee was subject to random searches upon exiting the building. Sterling conducted them himself, with a sadistic glee. If he was chosen, he was finished. He put the lozenge tin in his coat pocket. He walked through the corridors, every step an agony. He reached the main entrance hall. Sterling was there, standing by the Marine Guard's post, watching the staff file out. Arthur's blood turned to ice. Sterling's eyes scanned the departing employees, and then they settled on Arthur. He gave a slight nod. "Penhaligon. A word, if you please." This is it, Arthur thought. It's over. He walked toward the security officer, his legs feeling like lead. His mind raced. He could make a run for it. He could try to swallow the film cassette. It was hopeless. "Just wanted to ask about your cough," Sterling said, his expression unreadable. "Sounds worse. My wife swears by a hot toddy with a good bit of scotch. You should try it." Arthur stared at him, dumbfounded. Relief washed over him so intensely he felt dizzy. Yes, I will. Thank you, David." "Right. Off you go then. Have a good weekend." Arthur walked out of the embassy, a free man. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his luck was a finite resource, and he was spending it far too quickly. The dead drop for the film was more elaborate, more dangerous. Victor's instructions, delivered via another cryptic phone call, led him to the Novodevichy Cemetery. It was a place of ghosts, the final resting place of Russia's great writers, composers, and politicians. Under a slate-gray sky, among the mournful statues of angels and heroes, Arthur felt like a ghost himself. The signal was to leave a single red carnation on the grave of Anton Chekhov. The drop itself was 20 minutes later, at the other end of the cemetery. There was a specific tomb, a large, crumbling mausoleum for some forgotten Bolshevik general. At the back of the tomb, there was a loose brick. Arthur was to remove the brick, place the film cassette from the Zippo inside the cavity, and replace the brick. He found Chekhov's grave and laid the flower at its base. The act felt obscene, a stain on the memory of a great man. He then began the long, slow walk to the drop site, his senses on fire. He was a creature of the shadows now, a player in a game where the rules were written by men like Victor. He saw movement behind a row of crypts, and his heart leaped into his throat. But it was only a groundskeeper. He found the mausoleum. It was dark, covered in moss. He circled to the back, his shoes crunching on gravel. He ran his hand along the cold, damp stone until he found it, a brick that shifted slightly under his touch. He worked his fingernails into the cracks, pulling it free. A dark, spider-webbed cavity lay within. With trembling fingers, he took the Zippo from his pocket, opened the bottom, and removed the tiny film cassette. It looked so small, so insignificant, to hold so much betrayal. He placed it deep inside the hole, pushed the brick back into place, and wiped the dirt from his hands. As he walked away, he didn't look back. He knew he was being watched. He could feel their eyes on him, the unseen architects of his ruin. The price for his family's safety was his own damnation, and he was paying it in installments. The drops became a terrifying routine. Once a month, a new demand, a new target, the schedule for the secure telephone unit, a transcript of a low-level consular communication, a floor plan of the embassy's new extension. Each time, Arthur died a little more inside. He became a phantom in his own home. He and Lena barely spoke. He couldn't look her in the eye without seeing the face of Victor, without feeling the crushing weight of his deceit. He saw the worry in her eyes, the way she watched him when she thought he wasn't looking. "Artur, what's wrong?" she asked him one night, her hand on his arm. "You're so distant. It's like you're not even here. Is it the work? Is it Moscow? We can ask for a transfer. We can go back to London." He wanted to scream the truth. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess and let the consequences fall where they may. But the image of her and Thomas in a frozen wasteland stopped him. The KGB's threat was a hook in his soul, and they could twist it whenever they pleased. It's just the work, he lied, pulling away. A lot of pressure lately. It will pass. But he knew it wouldn't. Victor, his handler, became the central figure in his life, more real than his wife or his colleagues. Their meetings were infrequent, always in public, yet intensely private. A shared bench in a park, a brief encounter in a crowded museum, a table at a cafe where they never spoke a word to each other, but left items under the table. Victor was a master psychologist. He would sometimes bring news of Arthur's family. "I saw your son in the park yesterday," he said once, as they stood side by side at a railing overlooking the Moscow River. "He was feeding the pigeons. He has his mother's smile. It is a good thing to have a family to protect. It gives a man purpose." It was both a comfort and a threat, a reminder of what he stood to lose. The pressure was mounting inside the embassy as well. Small, almost imperceptible leaks were being noticed in London. A diplomatic initiative was preempted by the Soviets. A trade negotiation stalled because the other side seemed to know their bottom line in advance. Nothing could be pinned down, but the suspicion was there. A poison seeping into the embassy's foundations. Sterling's patrols of the secure areas became more frequent, his gaze more intense. He started varying his schedule, making it impossible to predict when he might appear. The 2-minute window Arthur relied on was gone. Then came the demand that he knew would break him. The phone call was different. It wasn't Victor. It was a clipped, anonymous voice. "Metro station, Arbatskaya, tomorrow, 4 p.m. eastbound platform, the far end." Read a copy of the Morning Star. The change in protocol terrified him. It meant something had changed. Something was escalating. He stood on the platform the next day, the British Communist newspaper a garish flag of his betrayal. A train roared into the station, a blast of hot, metallic air preceding it. As the crowd surged forward, a man bumped into him, hard. "Izvinite," the man grunted, and was gone, swallowed by the crowd boarding the train. Arthur's pocket was heavier. He reached in and found a small, hard packet of cigarettes. Back in his apartment, he locked himself in the bathroom and tore it open. Tucked behind the real cigarettes was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. The message was typed. "Top priority. Require full key list for Trident teleprinter. Current month. Failure is not an option. Your son has a nasty cough. Ensure he gets the best medical care." Arthur felt the world drop away from him. Trident was the code for the highest level cryptographic channel, the one that linked the embassy directly to MI6 headquarters in London and GCHQ in Cheltenham. It carried intelligence on Soviet military movements, reports from British agents in the field, assessments of Kremlin leadership. It was the crown jewels. Getting the key list for the Nightingale pad was like stealing a key to a garden shed. This was the master key to the entire fortress. And they had mentioned Thomas's cough. A simple cold. But they knew. They were watching his home. They were watching his son. The message was clear. "We can touch you whenever we want." Stealing the Trident list was borderline impossible. It was kept in a separate, smaller safe inside the main vault. A safe within a safe. The combinations were known only to Sterling and the ambassador himself. The list was never brought out into the main Cipher room. It was used in a separate, shielded enclosure by a specially cleared signals officer who came in twice a week. Arthur didn't even have access to that room. He had to refuse. He had to tell them it couldn't be done. But the thought of his son, small and vulnerable, paralyzed him. For 2 days, he was a ghost, drifting through his work, his mind racing through impossible scenarios. He could go to Sterling, confess everything. He and his family would be flown out of the country. But would they? The British government might see Lena and Thomas as liabilities, Soviet citizens who could be used as leverage again. They might be left behind. Or worse, MI6 might try to use him, turn him into a double agent, putting him and his family in even greater danger. He was trapped, with no good options left. His only hope, his only insane, desperate chance, was the annual embassy fire drill, scheduled for the following Wednesday. During the drill, the entire building was evacuated. Per protocol, all secure areas had to be locked down. All classified material had to be stowed in the safes. Sterling would personally sweep the secure floors to ensure compliance before heading to the muster point in the courtyard. The protocol was rigid. But what if there was a fire? A real one? A small, contained one? Just enough to cause confusion. Just enough to draw Sterling away from his sweep for a few critical minutes. The plan that formed in his mind was born of pure desperation. In the small kitchenette adjoining the secure corridor, there was an old, faulty toaster that the administrative staff were always complaining about. It often tripped the circuit breakers. On Wednesday morning, Arthur smuggled in a small ball of steel wool, tucked into his sock. The fire drill was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:55, as the first bells began to ring, he made his move. While his colleagues were busy stowing their documents, he slipped out of the cipher room and into the kitchenette. He jammed the steel wool deep into the toaster's heating elements and pushed the lever down. He walked back to his post, his heart pounding a frantic, suffocating rhythm. He locked the documents in his own safe and stood by the door, waiting. The evacuation bells blared. Staff began filing out into the corridor. He saw Sterling, clipboard in hand, beginning his sweep at the far end. Then a smell. Acrid smoke. A wisp of it curled out of the kitchenette door. Then another, a thin, gray plume. Someone shouted, "Fire!" Panic, low level but effective, rippled through the corridor. The orderly evacuation became a hurried shuffle. Sterling's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed. He barked into his walkie-talkie. "Sterling to control. We have a potential real fire, Zone Blue. Repeat, real fire. Stand by." This was his moment. Instead of turning right to exit with the others, Arthur turned left, deeper into the secure zone, towards the ambassador's office suite and the signals enclosure. The smoke was thickening, the smell of burning plastic sharp in the air. People were coughing, hurrying away from it. No one was looking at him. No one was paying attention to the quiet Cipher clerk moving against the tide. He reached the signals enclosure. The door was, as he'd prayed, unlocked. The signals officer must have left in a hurry when the alarm sounded. Inside, the air was still and cool. And there, on the desk, next to the Trident machine, was the signals officer's burn bag, ready to be taken to the incinerator. And sitting on top of the bag, not yet stowed in the safe because the officer had clearly been in the middle of his work, was the Trident key list. A thin booklet with a stark red border and the words "Top Secret Umbra" stamped across the front. His hands shook so badly he could barely function. He pulled out the Zippo. He didn't have time to be careful. He opened the booklet to the current month's page, a dense grid of 5-figure groups. He snapped 2 quick photographs, the silent clicks of the shutter lost in the cacophony of the alarm bells. He then placed the booklet back exactly as he'd found it, closed the door to the enclosure, and merged back into the stream of evacuees, his face a mask of mild concern. In the courtyard, chaos reigned. 2 small fire engines from the Moscow Fire Department had arrived, their lights flashing. Sterling was briefing them, pointing back towards the building. Arthur saw him glance over the assembled staff, his eyes doing a head count. Arthur made sure to be seen, pulling his collar up against the smoke that was now drifting from an upper window. The fire was a minor electrical one, quickly extinguished. But it had served its purpose. It had shattered the routine. It had given him his window. The dead drop for the Trident film was the riskiest yet. A direct exchange. Victor wanted to see him. The instructions, delivered by a second cigarette packet, were simple. A public toilet in the gum department store opposite Red Square. 5 p.m. He was to enter the third stall, lock it, and wait. The gum was a sea of humanity, a chaotic mix of tourists, shoppers, and watchful men in gray coats. Arthur felt 1,000 eyes on him. The public toilet smelled of ammonia and stale cigarettes. He entered the third stall, the lock clicking shut with a sound of utter finality. He waited. The seconds stretched into minutes. He could hear footsteps, the flushing of toilets, hushed Russian conversations. A piece of paper slid under the door. On it, one word: film. He took the cassette from the Zippo. His hands were slick with sweat. He knelt and slid the tiny object under the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the cassette disappeared. Another piece of paper slid back into its place. Arthur picked it up. The message was brief. Good. This is the last one. Your obligation is fulfilled. We will not contact you again. Your family is safe. He read it again, and again. Could it be true? Was it over? A wave of relief, so profound it almost made him sick, washed through him. He had done the unthinkable, betrayed his country at the highest level. But he had saved his family. He had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. He left the stall, his legs unsteady. He washed his hands, staring at his own reflection in the cracked mirror. He looked older, his face etched with lines of fear that hadn't been there a few months ago. The man in the mirror was a stranger, a traitor, but a father who had done what he had to do. He walked out of the gum and into the twilight of Red Square. The great, onion-domed cathedrals were silhouetted against a bruised purple sky. The Kremlin walls loomed, immense and powerful. He had given them his soul, and in return, they had given him back his family. He started the long walk home, feeling, for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope. He would request a transfer. They would go to a quiet posting somewhere in Europe. Bonn, perhaps, or Lisbon, somewhere with sun. He would rebuild his life. He would find a way to live with what he had done. When he opened the door to his apartment, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The television wasn't on. There was no sound of Thomas playing with his toy soldiers. The air was still and cold. "Lena," he called out, "I'm home." No answer. A cold dread, far worse than anything he had felt in the embassy or at the dead drops, began to creep up his spine. He walked through the small living room. A cup of tea sat on the table, cold and untouched. He pushed open the door to Thomas's bedroom. The bed was empty, the covers thrown back. A lone teddy bear lay on the floor. He ran to their bedroom. It was empty, too. But on the neatly made bed lay a single, official-looking envelope. His name was typed on the front, Arthur Penhaligon. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. It was a travel permit, issued by the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A one-way exit visa. For one person, Arthur Penhaligon. Valid for 24 hours. Beneath it was a second, smaller piece of paper. The same typewriter as the notes from the KGB. "A man with your skills is of no further use to us in Moscow. And a traitor is not welcome in his own country. You have a choice. You can use this visa and disappear, or you can stay. If you stay, your collaboration will be made public. Your wife will be arrested as the accomplice of a foreign spy. Your son will be placed in a state orphanage. We are men of our word. We told you your family would be safe. They will be. From you. He sank to his knees, the papers fluttering from his hand. It had all been a lie, a perfectly constructed trap. They hadn't wanted the secrets. Not really. The secrets were just the leverage, the tool they used to break him. Their goal was not intelligence, it was destruction. They didn't want to recruit a spy. They wanted to neutralize a British embassy employee and tear a family apart, a small, cruel victory in a vast, silent war. They had never intended to send his family to a gulag. The threat had been enough. They had made him destroy himself. He looked around the empty apartment. It was no longer his home. It was a museum of a life that had been stolen from him. Every object, Lena's scarf draped over a chair, Thomas's crayon drawing stuck to the refrigerator, was a testament to his failure. He hadn't saved them. He had damned them to a life without him, and damned himself to a life of exile. He picked up the exit visa. He could see Victor's thin, cruel smile, hear his gravelly voice. It gives a man purpose, to have a family to protect. They had given him a purpose, and then they had taken it away, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. He had nothing left but a one-way ticket to oblivion. As he stood in the crushing silence of the life he had lost, he finally